Good afternoon, Mrs. Bianca Stereo. For my English Canadian assignment, I will be analyzing and presenting T.S. Eliot's 1922 modernist masterpiece, The Wasteland, and drawing thematic and structural parallels to Timothy Finley's novel, The Wars, The Caged Bird, Still I Rise by Maya Angelou, the literary devices and the literary lenses learned in the course. The literary lenses that relates to the concept are New Historicism and Psychoanalytic, because historicism looks at the time period, the culture, and social background, while psychoanalytic explores the hidden fears, the desires, and mental motivations of characters or the authors. The soldiers in World War I experienced so much, like post-World War trauma, also known as shell shock. Coined in 1915, it was initially mistaken for a physical nervous system injury from explosion, but later recognized as a reaction to prolonged combat. Symptoms include mutism, tremors, amnesia, and treatments range from harsh electric shocks to early talking cures. Another thing that the soldiers experienced were psychological paralysis, where the soldiers lost the ability to move their limbs, walk, or speak without any physical wounds. One of the last things that the soldiers experienced were moral resistance. It involved non-violent opposition to military aggression, conscription, and wartime policies. Key forms of resistance included civil disobedience under occupation, conspicuous objection, and ideological anti-war act. Both The Wasteland and The Wars examine how post-World War I trauma causes a collapse of human morality, spiritual paralysis, and emotional detachment. However, both texts ultimately suggest that preservation and compassion serve as acts of resistance against total destruction. The difference between Wasteland and The Wars is Wasteland is about fragmented voices and shifting perspectives, mirroring a shattered society. The poems shift abruptly between different speakers, settings, languages, and literary references, making it feel disjointed and difficult to follow. Eliot wanted readers to experience the brokenness of post-war society, where traditional beliefs, values, and cultural unity had collapsed. The fragmented structure symbolizes a civilization struggling to find meaning and hope after immense destruction. While The Wars is a non-linear narrative utilizing memories, documents, and fragments to reflect Robert Ross's PTSD, rather than telling the story in chronological order. Finley presented through flashbacks, interviews, photographs, letters, military records, and the observations of unnamed researchers. This structure reflects how traumatic memories often return in scattered pieces instead of a clear linear sequence. Readers must assemble these fragments themselves, much like reconstructing history from incomplete evidence. Looking through the psychoanalytic lens, both works highlight how unaddressed trauma disrupts individual identity. In The Wars, the physical mud and devastation of the battlefield mirror Robert Ross's internal psychological wreckage, much like Eliot uses the sterile, dry landscape of the wasteland to symbolize spiritual and emotional decay. The difference between the dehumanization and moral resistance in both texts is that Eliot in Wasteland, I had not thought death had undone so many. This illustrates a spiritually dead, dehumanized society. Robert in The Wars, he was trying to save the horses. This shows Robert's compassion and moral resistance against the brutality of war. While The Wasteland portrays a world devoid of deep human connection, where interactions are mechanical, The Wars depict a military system that demands blind obedience and dehumanizes soldiers. Robert's choice to risk his life to save the trapped horses in the burning band represents a moral refusal to let war strip away his humanity. Both Eliot and Finley use literary devices to show how war changes people and society. One of the strongest devices is symbolism. In The Wasteland, water represents both death and the possibility of spiritual rebirth, while fire symbolizes destructive desire and moral decay. In the wars, mud and water trap soldiers and horses, symbolizing the physical and emotional suffering of war, while the burning band becomes a symbol of destruction and Robert Ross's courage. Another important device is fragmentation. Eliot's poem shifts constantly between speakers, languages, historical periods, creating a sense of confusion and brokenness. Similarly, Finley tells Robert Ross's story through flashbacks, photographs, interviews, and documents, instead of a chronological timeline. This mirrors how traumatic memories are often experienced in fragments. Both authors also use imagery to immerse readers in the devastation of war. Eliot describes dry, lifeless landscapes to symbolize spiritual emptiness, while Finley uses vivid images of mud, blood, fire, and animals to make the horrors of war feel immediate. Finally, both rely on contrast, placing hope beside despair and compassion beside violence, reminding readers that even in the darkest moments, humanity can still survive. Both authors heavily rely on natural elements like fire and water or mud to symbolize entrapment and decay. Furthermore, the nonlinear narrative style, Eliot jumping across languages and historical eras, and Finley scattering memories and archive fragments, recreate the authentic, fractured experience of trauma for the audience. A connection to Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou's poetry emphasizes resilience and the hope for freedom despite oppression. In Still I Rise, the repeated phrase, I rise, symbolizes strength in the face of suffering. Similarly, in the wars, Robert Ross's resistance, the dehumanizing effect of war by risking his life to save the trapped horses. In The Caged Bird, the image of the cage singing for freedom parallels the trapped horses. In the wars, both representing innocence longing for liberation, while The Wasteland focuses on despair and societal decay. Angelou reminds readers that hope and resilience can survive even the darkest circumstances. In conclusion, The Wasteland and the wars prove that the true horrors of war extend far beyond physical battlefields into our psychological and moral landscapes. They stand as a warning that the toughest war is the one fought within, and that empathy and memory are the only true defenses against total destruction. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.